It's day 3 of the Superbet Rapid event in Warsaw, and in this video I'm going to show you the epic game between Vincent Keymer, world's number 27, he's playing with the white pieces, against world's number 1, Magnus Carlsen, and what a game it is. A lot of interesting things are happening in this game. As always, between these two, a lot of action on the board, and the two have a big history already. I mean, Vincent is only 19 years old, Magnus is 33, but they have played already 29 games. Classical chess, also games with shorter time control, and also online chess. But so far, Magnus is dominating their mutual encounter. Magnus has managed to win 20 games so far, and Vincent Keymer managed to win only 1 game. But is he able to surprise his Angstgegner? Let's figure out in this video what's happening. Also, just make sure to subscribe to the channel. And here we go. Vincent opens with one knight f3. Magnus goes knight f6, c4, e6, b3. And you know, in the past when you saw these kind of moves like b3, g3, sort of double fianchetto setups, people were thinking this is a rather harmless system just to avoid a lot of theory, but nowadays it is actually quite popular, and Vincent Keymer is one of the leading specialists on the white side of this system. So it's interesting to see how Magnus is going to cope with it. After the moves d5, bishop b2, black develops the bishop to d6, active square. But now white goes for the move g3, preparing the other bishop to be fianchettoed as well, castling by black. Bishop g2, and here the move rook e8. So for the moment, black decides not to develop its minor pieces yet. He's looking for possibilities, probably to get some grip in the center by preparing the move e5. And interestingly, Vincent Keymer deviates from an earlier game he had last year. In that game, he opted for the move knight c3. This time, he decides to play the move d4 to control that e5 square. And, well, therefore it will be harder for black to make use of that with its rook. Anyway, there followed b6, castling kingside, bishop b7, knight c3. Very typical setup for both sides. I think if I would be playing here with black, I would seriously consider a move like knight bd7 to develop the last minor piece. Looks like a very solid position. Maybe white is a bit better, but nothing special going on so far. But Magnus had a different idea, which really surprised me. But it's very interesting. It makes the game very sharp, as here he voluntarily decides to trade off that pawn on d5 for the pawn on c4. Of course, white is going to recapture. And why it is so surprising? Well, normally you don't want to give up the control in the center that easily. Now white is having a beautiful pawn formation. The extra flank pawn for black doesn't seem to be too significant. But what is black intending to do here? Well, let's see. Magnus now played the move knight bd7. White goes queen c2. I think that's a good move, as you're intending to occupy the center with your pawn. Preparing e4, so the queen and the knight are covering that square. And now it's really time for black to take some measures. So Magnus played here the move c5, challenging the pawn on d4. And there are different ways of playing, but the game's continuation, d4, d5, is the critical test of black's very ambitious strategy. After pawn takes pawn, white does take back with the pawn. And the big question is, can you take that pawn on d5? Because both the knight and the bishop are hitting that pawn. But if you take it, there is a lot of trouble on the d file. White's going to take it, the bishop takes back. Now there are 4 pieces on this file, and with the move rook ad1, you are attacking the first piece. And the problem is that if the bishop goes away, then the second bishop is going to be taken. You may consider bishop e4, setting up a counterattack against the queen on c2, but there is queen d2. And now another problem is there with the bishop on d6. If the bishop moves, there is also a knight hanging on d7. So white is just winning material here, which means, and of course this was spotted by Magnus in the game, black cannot take the pawn on d5. So instead, he needs to think how to deal with white's pawn center. For now, there is a sort of a blockade in the center. These pawns are not too threatening yet. However, long-term speaking, these pawns, they can also seriously restrict the mobility of black's minor pieces. So here black played the move a6. I think that's a good and ambitious move, intending to grab some space on the queen side, trying to mobilize your 3 versus 1. If black can play b5, that would be great news. So white prevents it with the move a4, having nice control over the b5 square. And well, black is definitely a bit worse here, I would say. But Magnus probably has his own ideas about this position. He goes rook a b8, so indirectly supporting the advance of the b pawn. White played the move knight e2, so the knight is probably on its way to c4 to attack the bishop. That's one idea. Second idea is to support the advance of the e pawn. Here the bishop comes to e5, and it seems to me that the idea is that you may always consider trading off the bishop for the knight, after which the pawn on d5 is no longer supported by that knight on c3. So white here decides to play the move e4, supporting that pawn. But here it's black who is not going to sit and wait what white is going to do, how to come forward with these pawns. I mean, if you do give white all the time in the world moves like f4 to attack the bishop, if bishop goes away, you play e5. These pawns are really pushing black's pieces backward. So Magnus strikes back here with the move b5. Interesting idea. And white takes it, pawn takes, and even decides to take here with the knight on b5, which was not forced. There were other continuations as well, but looks very logical to take a pawn. And now the key idea is that the knight on b5 is unprotected. So how to make use of it? Open the diagonal for the rook to hit that knight. So bishop takes d5, black wins back the pawn immediately. Everything is hanging. White first takes on e5, attacking the rook as well. Knight takes e5. White takes the bishop on d5. Black takes with the rook on b5. So the smoke has cleared. Material is even. And in general, I would say that this sequence of exchanges is quite favorable for black, in the sense that he had a very cramped position, and now it looks like it's very even. Not much material left on the board, and I imagine a lot of viewers would think this is going to be a very boring draw. Very likely at some point these two pawns are going to be exchanged, and then it's just a 3 versus 3 with some other pieces. Other pieces will be swapped. It's going to be a draw. But there are still major pieces on the board, and it's very instructive to see how both sides are trying to keep some play in this position. So what should white do? Not really sure what the best move is. At least you should find a way to get your rooks involved, but where to place the rooks? On e1, d1, on c1? Not really sure. In any case, rook f e1 was played. So you're pinning the knight on e5. Not that it's a big problem, everything is defended yet, but at least black has to think about potential problems on that e file. But now Magnus is very alert, looking for tactical possibilities as well for himself. He played the move c4. So he's coming forward with this pawn, and here the pawn can be taken. It's twice attacked by knight and queen, but if you do take, black's idea must have been here to play rook c5, and it's now this time the knight on c4 which is pinned, because if it moves away, the queen on c2 is hanging. So that can't be played. The pawn is ignored. White played here rook a d1, indirectly supporting the pawn on d5. Here, black played the move g6, avoiding ever any sort of back rank issues, creating some luft for the king. That's absolutely fine. And here, knight to e4 is played. So white tries to trade off its it's knight for the knight on f6. And well, one of the points is that if you take the pawn now, well, there is knight c3, attacking the rook, attacking the knight can't go away, because then you see the queen on d8 is hanging. So the pawn is supported pretty well by white's pieces. Black instead decides to take on e4. Here the rook takes back, and still this bishop on g2, it's having enough control over the pawn on d5. For instance, now if black would take on d5, rook takes rook, queen takes back, black is a pawn up, but white will answer this idea with the move f4. And here you see exactly what I've been describing earlier. White sets up an attack on the knight, which is pinned. If knight goes away, the rook on e8 is unprotected and will be lost. So pawn can still not be taken. But here, once again, that's what Magnus has been doing so far pretty well. He is playing around white's passed pawn, and instead he played here the move queen b6. That is an excellent idea, because the queen is teaming up very well with the rook on b5. Black is looking for the chance to get a rook to the second rank, to attack the queen, and also the pawn on f2. Imagine the rook is there, and the queen would have to move, the white queen, then the pawn on f2 can be taken. So all of a sudden there are some very serious problems. White played the move rook e2, dropping back with the rook to control the b2 square. Also the bishop is still supporting the pawn. And for now everything is well covered. Magnus played here the move f6 to support the knight on e5 even better. Probably the rook from e8 can go somewhere. For instance, if white is very ambitious, wants to push its own pawn, then the rook can come to d8. So it no longer has to take care about that knight on e5. Everything is well covered, and the pawn on d6 will be lost. So white has to be very careful as well. You cannot just push your pawn that easily. May still be possible though. Let's say if you play it and you put your rook on d2, maybe bishop d5 is coming next, maybe at some point you can trade off the pawn on c4, then likely it will be a draw. But Keymer didn't play the move d6. He played h3, and frankly speaking, it's a very logical move to play. Because what is white's idea? He wants to kick that knight away from e5 with the move f4. But at this moment, you cannot play that move. It's not allowed because the king is in check. So you first got to move your king, and after black played the move king g7, very useful waiting move. Also black moves the king away to a better square. White places its own king on h2, so the king looks safe. There are never any back rank issues. So h2 looks like a safe square, while the pawn on h3 covers the g4 square. But this is what Magnus had been working towards to in the previous few moves. He had seen this in advance, that there are tactical possibilities. Because look at this, he played fantastic idea. You should realize, by the way, that white is threatening to play the move f4 to attack the knight. If knight goes away, rook is hanging. But Magnus is first. He played the move c3, which is an incredible idea, because it looks as if you're giving away your pawn for free. But if you take it, let's say queen takes c3, the rook on e2, it's no longer defended, and it does allow knight g4 check. After hg4, the rook on e2 can be taken. Black is an exchange up. So the pawn is poisoned, but more importantly even, black is about to play here the move rook b2, after which the queen is in trouble and the rook on e2 as well. Can white still defend here? Well, apparently there is one move which is pretty good, but it was not played in the game. It is the move rook e3, but it's very human that Keymer didn't play it at all. Because if I see this idea, I would go rook b2, attacking the queen. If queen c3, eliminating the pawn, there is rook takes f2. And once again, there are so many threats. Even here, the white king looks very dangerous. And the pawn on f2, it's no longer there. Knight g4 is an idea with a discovered attack on the rook on e3. So there are a lot of tactical ideas. If white finds the only move here, king h1, he is apparently okay. But it's a rapid game, guys. It's 25 minutes plus a 10 seconds increment. You cannot expect people to find all these sort of only moves. Instead, Keymer played a move queen a4. He's moving away the queen from its defensive post on c2, and it covers the g4 square. So if you give a check on g4, hoping to win the rook on e2, there's queen takes g4, and the queen not only captures the knight, but also protects the rook on e2. That is not working for black, but there is now, because of white's last move, a new tactical possibility here for black. And that was missed by white and spotted by Magnus Carlsen. If you want to find it yourself, pause the video, hit the subscribe button. Thanks for all your support, guys. Here we go. The big move is knight f3, check. And, well, black is about to take on e2, as I said. So bishop takes f3, only move. Rook takes rook, bishop has to take back. And now the queen takes on f2 with check. h1 is the only square for the king. You take the bishop and you're protecting your rook at the same time as well. Black is a pawn up. But as we know from positions with major pieces only, the king safety is what matters most. For instance, if you push your pawn here, there's rook b2 and mate on the second rank cannot be avoided. So instead, white decided here to give a check here first. And after king a checks, there are no more checks here for white. White brought the queen back to d4 to support the rook on d1. And well, if you play here rook b2, intending to give a mate on one of these squares, there is queen f4, and things are getting trickier. If king goes away, queen c7, and there are a lot of checks. Maybe black is winning, machines say so at least, but I think that's not what you want to allow at all. Instead, Magnus played a much better move. Rather than giving that rather than playing that idea of rook b2, he just give a check first on f3, which is very good, because if the king goes to h2 to defend the pawn, then rook b2 comes with check, and mate will follow on one of the next moves. So here white resigned, because if you instead go with your king to g1, then you pick up the pawn on g3 with check. The king has to move. You can take the pawn on h3, but even stronger is just to play rook b2 now. And there are still mating threats coming very soon. Like queen g2 is an idea. The king is cut off, and also the queen on g3 protects its own king very well. So this is victory number 21 in 30 games. Absolutely incredible for players of that level. I mean, Keymer, he's only like 100 points lower rated nowadays than Magnus. Very strong player, but to have such an underperforming score, that's quite remarkable. But that is what happens. If you lose a couple of games, it starts to stick in your mind, and you know that you're going to play each other a couple of times more in the future. And Magnus also knows the weaknesses of Vincent Keymer. Vincent has often this problem that he's overlooking these relatively simple tactical possibilities by his opponents. Also in earlier games against Magnus, he blundered in a few games. So that is something he definitely needs to work on. He's a fantastic player. He can play some brilliant chess, but he's also suffering when playing against world's #1. But that counts for all of us. Well, hopefully you like this video, and if you do so, one more time, I ask you a small favor. You know what to do. Hit the subscribe button and help me to grow this channel. I'll promise to cover many more exciting games from this event in the next couple of days. So stay tuned for more action. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.